The Bill and Kelly Show is recorded at Studio A at Executive Suite Squared in beautiful Hammond, Indiana. Now, here's Bill and Kelly. Hello and welcome to the Bill and Kelly Show. Today our guest is Noelle Stary. She's done some kind of unique things in her life in business. Number one, 2008, she actually started her first company. Who does that in 2008, right? You're thinking, and she's going to tell us who does that. Her first company was a marketing company called 20 Lemons Marketing. Then shortly afterwards, a year later, she opened up a co-working space in Woodridge, New Jersey. And she decided to write about this all in a new book that she's releasing, Main Street Moxie. And I tell you, for someone who's opened up two businesses right in the midst of a financial collapse, that takes moxie. So welcome to our show, Noelle.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, we're so honored to have you and so anxious to hear about your story. Why don't we start out about finding more about you, where you were born, raised, and where you went to school, and for whatever godforsaken reason, you decided to open up a business during the market crash.
Yeah, I really like to keep things interesting. I always tell my friends, I'm like, as long as I keep you entertained, we've got a good relationship. So once again, my name's Noelle Stary, and I am absolutely a Central Jersey girl. I was born in Central Jersey. I grew up here. I went to Catholic school around here. I did go to college down at University of Maryland, College Park, and I got my degree in business. And for me, I always thought that I was going to go into corporate America. Like, I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. I wanted to work on mergers and acquisitions. Like, Maryland's business school really promotes that type of stuff. At that time, most business schools were not talking about entrepreneurship, small business. And when I got out of college, I kind of fell into working with a hospitality entrepreneur who I ended up doing a lot of expansionary work with over the first few years that I was in business. And I did do a lot of the marketing associated with that hospitality group. And I remember at the time thinking, I just went to college. I wanted to get into corporate. Why am I doing small business? Like, this is not what I want. And he turned around to me and said, there is a whole industry behind hospitality other than like the one brick and mortar store that you see here. And very quickly, as the business grew to like multiple locations, and I got to see how people work together and brands merged and how we started building community, I just got this like love of small business and community and growth and loyalty. And I thought it was awesome. I loved it. And as I was getting established, I went and I worked for another marketing agency around the time of 2007, 2008. And I remember Obama winning the election. And I remember every day starting to see the market crashing. And I was working for this marketing company, and I was thinking they need to make some adjustments. Like, I had already been in another small business in hospitality, and I thought to myself, what are they doing? Because they felt like, as I had mentioned to you a little bit before, there was some speculation that the financial crisis in 2008 might have been a V-shaped recovery. And so, hey, were we just going to bounce out of this? And I just made the decision. I was like, I want to be in charge of what happens to me. Like, I was new to that company. I knew that if they were starting to do layoffs, I was going to be leaving. I thought about if I went into another corporation, I would be the first person in, I'd probably be the first person out. And I had always remembered the conversation where someone said to me, you're either a part of someone else's plan or they're a part of yours. And I just felt like I rather just take the risk myself and at least know that I'm the one who's depending on me to make certain things happen. And so I started my marketing company. And the real intent of my marketing company was, I felt like a lot of business owners would get stuff that was given to them from marketing agencies, and whether it was materials or if it was collateral or online stuff, the only people in the company that knew about it was the person who made the deal with the marketing company. I never felt like the communication went all the way through. And so I started my company with the concept of, I want to have a hands-on approach where the marketing that we do needs to get translated and communicated to the rest of your team. And so the idea was not a lot of clients, but really hands-on service with them. And so I started my company, and I was probably about 26 at the time. And I was living in an apartment, and I was thinking to myself, I am so sick and tired of sitting in a room by myself. And it's kind of the joke, right? Because isn't that what all of us are doing right now today? And so I said, I want to be able to be in an area where I can collaborate with others. And so I got together with another colleague, and we started New Jersey's first co-working space. And that was about 2009. And a purpose of a co-working space is, so if you're a solo entrepreneur, or if you're in sales and you just need a place to go when you're on the road, or if you're a startup, or if we actually tended to get a lot of people that might have been in consulting for 20 or 30 years, and they were just tired of working from home and they wanted to be around other people. And these people would come and just kind of take select desk and work out of the space, but they started to kind of have a community, and some of the businesses started working together. So it was a really great experience.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that we're going through here in the Midwest, and particularly in the Chicago area. There's been a number of those co-working spaces. In fact, our studio is at Executive Suite Squared, which is a co-working space, and just the amount of collaboration that goes on. The pandemic has changed that because we can't get back and use that space the way we'd like to, but we still go in periodically. There's conference rooms and so on. But yeah, it is a novel concept, particularly for a startup company. It's almost like a self-stimulated incubator, if you will. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, we have a number of people who anywhere from that rent out the lobby. They go and use the Wi-Fi in the lobby, and they have access to the printers. Great concept, and it's but again, you're doing all this during a real turbulent market. Although the co-working space speaks to a lot of that, because no one is going to want to sign a year. Sometimes out in the East Coast, I hear you have 3-year leases based upon the market that was going on back then. So, I mean, that was not too crazy of an idea, actually. Now you decided to. Now you also, the success of the co-working space was so good that you decided to market, or at least, or license that out, I should say, for use by someone else, which is that you must have had some great marketing inertia behind that.
Yeah,
Happen.
so our space, so we were there for about 10 years.
Mhm.
And so the book, Main Street Moxie, comes from the fact that the business and the office space that I worked out of was on Main Street in Woodbridge. And, it's so funny, like when I talk to people in California, they're like, oh, I love the concept of Jersey and Main Streets, and you guys do small parades on your Main Street, because that's not really the case, right? In California, let's say. But for us, I mean, I feel like I've lived or worked on a Main Street in different towns for most of my career. And so what I loved about it is we were, downtown Woodbridge is kind of a historic area. And in fact, the building that I'm in, it used to be clothing store, like almost like a Macy's, you know, like a smaller version of Macy's. It was a department store. And so it's got some really cool skylights, and it's just really interesting. And so the space was kind of already cut up in unique ways. Unfortunately, with COVID, we shut it because, similar to what you were saying before, the space was too large for the rooms to be for one person, and too small for decent social distancing. And so those spaces, unfortunately, our flagship location shut. But we were there for 10 years, and we had hundreds of different members coming in and out of the space and working with us on our virtual mail programs. And so for years, I had thought about, how do we expand? Do we take out more leases? Do we, what do we do? And I really went back to my roots, and my roots, like where I started in business, was working, and again, being from Jersey, working for a diner that went from one diner to multiple diners to catering facilities. And what I loved about the diner concept was business ideas were happening in those local diners, and local diners happen in every neighborhood in the state. And so I felt that building owners of different towns would want to have an opportunity to set up co-working spaces in their own town and to utilize their empty space. And why I thought that that was important was, as much as people came to our Woodbridge location, and we were at the intersection of all the major highways in the state, I always heard the statement, I love your space, I wish it was in my town. I love your space, I wish it was in my town. And so it was the most efficient way that I thought about, how can we actually bring it closer to where the different people are. And the second piece to that was, you know, as we've been going through COVID, and I've been really trying to decide, what do we need to do? You know, part of, again, what you and I were talking about before we jumped on this was, I think people's audience changed. Like, people were driving further. You know, I live in a town where people drive an hour into Manhattan to go to work. They're not going to want to do that. Their kids have like changing schedules with school all the time. If there was a spot right here in this town, it at least gives people a chance to get out and do some type of collaboration, or just get a different frame of reference. And so while I think that we're still a little bit challenged, and the data and the polls are just starting to come out in the co-working environment, I think co-working is going to like come back on a total upswing as we just get over this winter.
And that's very true. Now, one of the things that I keep sitting here thinking, and the marvel behind you creating a licensing that, you know, based upon you marking that original co-working space, that has now created all this inertia for you to license. I mean, basically, that is a business dream, to license something that you don't have the expenses occurred, but you license your name and your marketing concept to someone else to use to open up that. So could you mind spending some time and telling us what that looks like? Do you recommend, well, first of all, they take on your branding, right? You probably have a logo and branding and all the marketing that you put into that, which is absolutely genius, by the way. So what does that look like? Do you get into like a operational layout, how they operate this, and do you create like a franchising where, you know, here's what you do?
Yeah, so super interesting. So there was a lot of conversation when I was trying to come up with this idea around, do we want to set it up as a franchise? Do we want to set up as a licensing model? And franchises have a lot more laws and regulations around them. And again, I feel like part of the value of being a neighborhood place is that your place feels like your neighborhood. And I didn't want everything to feel super cookie cutter. I wanted it to kind of feel like siblings, not twins. you know?
Mhm.
And so as we were going into the other two locations, you know, we really, the big parts for me were how big is the square footage that we have to work with? Because you want to be at a certain mass, you need like a threshold that makes the space work.
Mhm.
And then from there, how do we design the space? And I think that the biggest value that I have from having 10 years of experience is understanding how do people behave in a space. Like I always explained it as this, like if you went to a pizza place, you know that you go up to the counter, you order your pizza, you sit down, they go, hey, your slice is ready. You go up, you get your slice, you can eat your slice, you pay for it after, you know, like there's a little bit of the culture's understood. Whereas in co-working, it is still pretty new. I mean, when we started our co-working space, it was actually called Launchpad Creatives. And I had my marketing company at the time. My partner had a marketing company, and we really thought this place is going to be filled with creatives just like us. And every time I would tell someone I run a company, Launchpad Creatives, they would say, well, what is that? And I would say, it's a co-working space. And they would say, well, what is that? And so when we rebranded it, I just said, we're calling it the co-working space. So our spaces are actually the co-working space at town. So at Woodbridge, at East Brunswick, at North Brunswick. And, you know, we wanted to set it up so that the brand was the same. And then we work with the building owners to say, what's your square footage? And let's talk about how people use the space. And so we break them up in between 1-person, 2-person team offices, conference room space. And ironically, and this is where you say, was it a bright idea to start a business in 2008? Probably not. It probably was like really hard. And I joke politely. I say, if I knew it was going to be that hard, I don't know if I would do it again from that. But when you get through it, you're like, all right, I made it through that. But with the co-working spaces, when we designed the new spaces, we actually designed the desk to be 6 feet apart. Like they were actually designed as 6 feet desks. They were designed with certain types of open face partitions so that you could just see below your hands. And so when COVID hit, while my Woodbridge location actually needed demo work in order to work in COVID, my other two spaces, the other two spaces needed nothing. Like they are actually perfectly designed for coronavirus. And so it was interesting to see the spaces available. And I think the biggest difference between like what we saw in 2008 and what we're seeing now is I think we had a really strong economy going into where we're at. And so businesses want to adjust and want to figure out how do they keep going. They already have so much momentum behind them. And so I feel like with the spaces, it's been a matter of, you know, people want to be in a space. They want to be safe. I think they still want to be around people, like, but we're seeing this like evolution from like a technology standpoint. Like in 2008, we were all using just lock keys, right? Where everything's touched. Well, now all of our key systems are on our phones. And so you could lock down an entire space because the governor said you need to be on lockdown and we need to make sure no one's touching anything or going into spaces. That wasn't even feasible 10 years ago. And so even when we've moved all of our communication to online and Zoom calls, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges we have today are doing 40-person Zoom calls aren't really that efficient for networking. But I think we're going to be seeing all these fast changes in technology by the time we're out of this that are going to make them a lot more user friendly.
Yeah, and it's just the natural progression, if you will, that happens regardless of what happens. I mean, it's you know, true that all these business concepts have had to change because of COVID, and you know, when is it going to end? You don't know. You know, we're talking about a vaccine coming out. Well, is that going to be effective? We won't know till that happens. But and that's where I come to again. Since we started the show, I can't count how many times we changed the way we did things based upon stuff not really doing what we want it to. And in 21st century, I think that is going to be the theme: change,
Yeah.
adapting, and changing, pivoting. Pivoting is the new word. I kind of like it.
So, oh, see, you like pivoting? I'm over pivoting. Like pivoting, I don't need to pivot. Like,
Yeah, I know.
I kind of have more of this like sniper approach where I'm like, you just need to like fail forward.
Sniper, huh?
You just fail forward. If it doesn't work, you get up, you
Keep
try
going.
something else. You
Keep
get up,
going.
you try
Yeah.
something else, and
Well, you get
you
dizzy from
keep
pivoting, right?
shifting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
shifting. Yeah, no, the ability, the key thing is being able to adapt. And that's it. That's what you've got to be able to do. Analyze your environment, know what's working, what's not knowing, and begin to analyze. There could be organic change. And if you are blinded by organic change, then bad stuff is going to happen. If you don't realize and say, oh, what do I need to do to adapt to these changes in my viewership or changes into your co-working space? That's the way things happen. So boy, and man, and I can't tell you, the name of your book follows it right along. Moxie. You've got to have the grit to continue going forward and being able, and that with that grit is not saying you're moving forward blindly. You are looking at everything around you and making sure you're adapting and making changes. And I constantly tell people yes, you don't want to constantly look back, but sometimes something happened in that review mirror that is the reason why you're here today doing what you're doing. And sometimes it's reflection and
Yeah.
looking at that, what happened, and realizing, oh, I guess that was meant to happen. So
Yeah.
yeah, it is absolutely amazing. So, but for what you've done and at your age, in 2008, a lot of people. I mean, I still know some people who just retired. They said that's it, and they
Yeah.
took their chips and went elsewhere. But to continue on and move on, but that's something that I think that you identified with is the ability to look at what happened. You closed down your original co-working
Yeah.
space, but you took what you learned from that space and created this ingenious idea to begin licensing that out to other people. And now you're taking the benefit of all this,
Yeah.
and people are paying you for what you learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's like a few like tips and tricks, like as we go through all of this, I mean, I'll be really honest. I mean, my marketing company, we do a ton of work in the hospitality industry. So within 48 hours, my marketing company had every one of the restaurants that we work with being shut down. And I had very panicked restaurant owners calling me. And then I had an entire business model for membership and office space that's on a month-to-month basis. And I thought to myself, I'm going to literally fold, like I'm going to lose everything overnight. And I think it's discouraged. I mean, you get these moments where you're like, I am really discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're feeling really discouraged, I think I always go back to like two really important pieces. One, what's the self-care you're giving yourself? And I have to tell you, I must have walked miles that first month, because I was like, I just need to like walk and move and give myself some mental breathing space. And on the flip side of that, I felt like it was so important to have the right team around you, the right professionals, the right people who know you, to say, well, let's work through this. Let's think about this. What are your options? And so I think kind of having people to bounce off of and also giving yourself enough that like reflective self time is so critical. I think as we're like 8 months into this entire pandemic, it's exhausting and people are exhausted. And, being able to actually just say, I am hitting a hard stop and pausing so that I could regroup mentally is really important. You know, everyone's working from home, and I've been hearing tons of business owners saying they're starting at 7 o'clock in the morning, they're working straight through the night. If they can't sleep, they're waking up, they're going right back onto the computer.
Oh boy.
And yeah, I mean, it's crazy, and it's
Yeah.
not one or two. I mean, this is tens and 20s and 30s of business owners that I talk to that are saying these things. And so, you know, I think like we really need a pause, you know, and you know, Main Street Moxie isn't just to say, hey, I made it through and I'm doing awesome. It's to kind of say, hey, I'm in this, it's a relatable book, right? Like, I think anyone that takes a look at it is going to have certain areas where they're like, I totally relate to this, or man, I just needed to hear that right now. And so I think it's about this, you know, what I love about New Jersey and New Jersey tourism and our towns is these main streets really make our communities. And so it's the time that we need to give back to them. We need to give back to those small businesses and support them, because they're the ones that are really, you know, in my mind, the backbones of our community.
Right. And you know, I'm glad you brought up towns and cities, because a lot of people, a lot of organizations or towns or cities ignore what and don't include their small business owners in their plans. And boy, I tell you, there is not anything that will pave a road to failure for a city or a town without including those small business owners. The ones that have been most successful, and there's a town here called Valparaiso, Indiana, that has been a major success because they created this town square environment,
Yeah.
created a historical square, if you will, where it not only supported small businesses, they encouraged it and created this environment by creating a liquor license that they, as opposed to making all these places go out and spend $20,000 on a
Sure.
liquor license, they got the
That's
liquor
smart.
license,
Yeah.
divvied it up, and said, okay, you're only going to have to pay 1,000, but here's the rules. You know, you've got to create this much space where we would like to be included in your fascia design and try to create this environment of a town square. And boy, that's been one of the greatest success stories out of Northwest Indiana, or actually the Midwest, is when you do include the small business owners and create a way for them to flourish and be successful, it brings people to your town. So,
Yeah,
yeah, and
absolutely.
places like co-working spaces, bars, diners, gift shops, all benefit.
I'd love to even give one more kind of shout out to another business owner that I know that I think is doing something really innovative, and I love it. She has a website, beyondmain.com. And so she had started it before the pandemic, but um, they're doing well, and I can understand why. So all these Main Street businesses can kind of roll up into like a national Main Street online shopping experience. And so you can shop from different Main Street small businesses on one platform if the different towns like
Wow.
go on to these platforms. And so I just think it's like one of the most interesting things I've seen
Yeah.
lately. And, you know, I haven't talked to her lately, but it's been really interesting. Like I said, I think we are never going to work the way we did before. I think we're going to be moving into just like fascinating new technologies. And I think the speed at which business is going to occur is going to really start speeding up again.
Yeah. Boy, I love that idea, creating an online presence for businesses within a square or where have you, downtown or perimeter of the downtown. That is a great idea. That gets our award.
Yeah,
So give her our congratulations
I
for doing
will.
it, because I hear so much from small business owners that are in a town that doesn't listen to them, or they try to create this, well, we're going to do it this way. Well, that's going to shut down our business district and that type of thing. And a lot of these small business owners can't afford to get, they could barely put together an online website presence or Facebook page, let alone someone that will say, look, let's market your items, on a commonly shared area. Boy, that's great. Man, I'm excited about that one. You got to share that with me.
I will. Don't you
Yeah,
know all the great things coming out of Jersey?
yeah, man, you guys are going to have to create a new reality show that gives more of a positive spin for Jersey now.
We're working on it.
Yeah, the Jersey girls recreate the town, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, that's great. Boy, oh boy. Well, we probably better start wrapping up the show. But I tell you, this has been kind of exciting.
Yeah.
It's always exciting to have people on our show that have great new ideas that aren't afraid. And that's one thing, hats off to you, because it doesn't sound like fear. You remember the Fear? What do they call that show with Joe Rogan?
Fear Factor? Was it Fear Factor? Yeah.
Fear's not a factor for you, right? So great. Listen, this has been very, very refreshing having you on, sharing some of your ideas. Love to have you back on again. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we wrap up the show?
I'd love for people to check out the book. We're really excited about it. Like I said, I think it's a great feel-good, fast read. It's not complicated at all. You can find it online at Amazon. So Main Street Moxie, written by Noelle Stary.
Right. And we'll make sure all your websites and links to Amazon are put up on the show when it drops. So great. Well, this has been pleasant. This has been great, actually. So listen, Noelle, we wish you the best in all your future. It sounds like we don't need to do that because you're going to plow right through anything that gets in your way. So congratulations for that. And we'll wrap up the show by saying goodbye for now, everybody. And
thank you.
Thank you. Main Street Moxie is available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. You can find out more about the co-working space at www.coworkinginjersey.com.
This episode of The Bill and Callie Show is brought to you by
Dutch Farms, maintaining a family tradition of quality for over 91 years.